evening, everyone. Welcome to the Pyware Homeschool Masterclass. Tonight's guest is Tim Fairbanks, and he's going to be going over the 6-foot marching grid and how it's used and taught with indoor and football. Tim's been with us for probably 18 or 20 plus years. So I'm going to hand it over to him, let him give a little bit of a background for you. Tim?
Hey, Dustin. Glad to be here. I think these classes are really awesome. Hopefully, the 6-foot grid system, I'm going to be able to shed some light on that tonight. A little bit of background about myself. I am a full-time drill designer for marching bands, drum corps, color guards, and indoor drum lines. I will say that my specialty, my passion, is definitely indoor drumline. I'm the percussion director at Centerville High School and the director and designer at Rhythm X. And that's where I really find the most fulfillment of all the activities, though I love them all just as much, right, equally. So the 6-foot grid system started for me about 15 years ago, and this was when drum lines were really just kind of exploring what you could do. The first thing that people did was a 7.5-foot grid, which is a 4-step grid, right? Taken directly from outdoors, brought indoors. Then people tried a 10-foot grid, 4-foot grid, 5-foot grid. The 5-foot grid was really popular for a while because that was the length of the seams, that the floors were seamed together. So you would get your color guard floors, especially color guards use the seams a lot, and you could use those as your markers, and they were usually 5 feet apart. I'm very particular. So for me, the 5-foot seams weren't always exactly 5 feet. So that system didn't really vibe with my policies in my own head. So I kind of settled on the 6-foot grid system based on what kids already know when they come into high school. And the things that they know are feet and yards. They've already been taught those terms, and they know what that means. So if you say to a kid, especially a freshman, that says, okay, here's your unit of measurement, it's 22.5 inches. That makes no sense to that kid, right? You can teach them, okay, it's 8 of these steps in between the big white lines, but after that, they got no reference for what a step is. So I settled on the 6-foot grid because of how many denominators it has. It's able to be divided easily into halves, right? 3 feet into thirds is 2 feet, and into quarters, which is 1.5 feet. And using those fractions of a block, I call them blocks. Every 6-foot square on the floor is a block, and using the fractions of those spaces gave me the intervals, right? That was like the first thing that I wanted to try and define for drum lines especially, is what are some consistent intervals. So I'm going to share on here. There's a handout, and everybody should be able to see it. So this is an intervals diagram, and I'm going to share my screen also so that we can see that. And then I can kind of point through it as we go. But the thing that I wanted was that the intervals would stay consistent from each section, and that they wouldn't change throughout the show. Obviously, some shapes are going to be different than others. Let's pull this up. But I wanted the snares to have a consistent thing. Outdoors, they're always 2 steps or 1.5 back in the old days. And let me point this to share your screen. Application window. Good. Hopefully everybody can see that. Dustin, are you getting that on your side?
Yes, I am. Okay.
So the intervals, they're broken down into 4, right? There's 4 step sizes and 4 intervals, and they're the ones that I use, I would say probably for 90% of a show. The first one is very simple. We call it ons, and it's 6 feet apart. So on the floor, we put a diamond every 6 feet, front and back, side to side. And let me back up just a little bit and talk about because I'm going to use some terms here that we haven't really talked about yet. I want to show you what a floor looks like and talk about my my approach to how to describe the floor. So we're just going to pull up a file here. Okay. So now, side to side, you can see on the file here, there's all these 6-foot blocks, and side to side, this floor goes out to the 34. And this is something that I struggled with for a while. I used to call this the 50 and this the 45. Justin, can you see my mouse?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So, and then a couple years ago, I settled on calling these the 50, the 48, the 46, because that's what they actually are, right? 6 feet is 2 yards. So the 48 is literally 2 yards away from the 50. This translates outdoors pretty easily as well. If you ever need, we're in Ohio, so we never get the luxury of doing this, but if you ever needed to practice outside for your indoor show, you could take this grid and put it right on the football field. So 50 to 48, and then this one goes out to the 34. And then front to back, I labeled them letters. So I start my A where the tarp starts, and you can see in this case, the tarp is right behind the pit, which is really common these days. People have experimented with lots of different ways to do this, but I would say probably 80% of the groups will have their front in the front and then their tarp right behind that. It just helps a lot with setup. So the A starts in the front, goes all the way back to the I. Some of these are based on the size of your tarp. It's going to be based on your rehearsal space and the space that you have at WGI. So like this tarp is 50 feet deep, which for me is 8 squares of 6. And then I like to put a foot buffer on the outsides, around the outsides, so that if my dot is like on the 36I right here, my feet will still be on the tarp, even though I'm on the edge. So those are some of the references. Let me see if I can get back to my other one. I should be able to. Okay, so back to the intervals diagram. So now we know that our dots here on the 50, on the 48, the 46, and the ons are going to be every 6 feet. And when I talk to kids who are just learning this, I often use the intervals as kind of a guide of what section could be at this interval. And ons is one that everybody can be at, right? Snare drums can be at that. Tenors, bass drums, cymbals. Snares, if they're playing a lot of stuff, they won't be at this interval. It's pretty far apart, but everybody could be. The next one is on splitting. So this is 3 feet of space in between, or 36 inches. And this is one that snares kind of live their life at. Anytime they're playing something hard, it's almost always on and splitting. Or they could be staggered. We could put them at 4s, but be staggered. Bass drums can't be at this unless they're facing straight forward. Tenors also can't be at this because their drums are more than 36 inches. Cymbals can be at this, but we found that all the visual things that they do now, they need a little bit more space too. So this second one here, on and splitting, is mostly snare drums. The next one, this is 4 feet or 48 inches. And you can see down here the 2/3 interval, right? This is 2/3 of a block. 4 feet is 2/3 of the 6-foot block, 48 inches. And I often call this thirds because when I'm giving out the dot would be on, a third in, a third out, on, a third in, a third out, and on. So if I'm like live staging and I'm telling people what their dots are, I say the word third a lot, but really the interval is 2/3, 2/3 of a block. Okay, then the last one is quarters or 3/4 of a block. So this one's on, a quarter in, which is 1.5 feet, split in, a quarter out, and then back to on. So the 2/3, this is snares at a little bit bigger interval, maybe more open parts that they're playing. Cymbals like that interval. Tenors, they don't really fit at 2/3, right? That 48 inches to 54 inches, if you have them moving at all, their drums are probably going to hit their 3 and 4 drum together. But the 54 inches, they like that one a lot. So if tenors are ever playing anything dense, they're going to be at quarters like this. Or I might put them on and splitting, but have it be staggered so that they're 6 feet apart, but there's people in between in the spaces so that their side to side is actually a little bit tighter. Front to back, I know this is a lot of information all at once, and I'll be glad to take questions once I get through this. Front to back, A, B, C, and D. And you see here, I just listed some different versions of what a dot might be, right? A quarter behind the A, a quarter in front of the B, a third behind, a third in front, on, splitting the C and the D. And then you can look down here, splitting the 50 and the 48, just like it would be on the football field, I would call that the 49. And splitting the B and the C, instead of saying splitting line B and line C, that's a whole bunch of words, I would say, okay, Joe, you're on the 49, B, and C. And if I've said B and C, then that means that he's splitting. Okay. Let's stop sharing now. We'll go back. And Dustin, have you gotten any questions on any of that stuff?
Not currently. So
Okay.
just while we're discussing this, do you use the coordinates that we print out and just modify the terminology?
Great question. So in Pyware, I'll just show you what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So now in Pyware, I have, if I go to hit print coordinates, my grid designer is set up so I have these listed as my markers, right? So all these are already listed. And then when I go to hit print coordinates, I've got side 1, side 2, back, front, inside, and then I say feet here instead of steps.
We can't see that window. Can you take a look at the sharing? You may have to swap over to.
Yeah, because Pyware's got a couple of different windows open. Yeah. That makes sense. Can you see the print preview now?
There we go.
Okay, so now the actual coordinates are going to say what they do. So like this is a half a foot outside the 50-yard line on the G. Right, so because I've got the 50, 48, 46, and A, B, C, D already in the grid, the coordinate comes out sounding exactly how I want it to. I don't have to do any kind of translation.
So basically, if you can jump back over to the print coordinates window, I'd like to see the grid terminology because that did not show up. So you've renamed the word step to the word foot, or the word feet, so it references all in feet, correct?
Yep.
Oh, there we go.
Yep. And actually, the horizontal yard lines, I do, I don't actually use yard line. That was saved there.
Yes.
Side to side, I would say this is the 50-yard line, but on the vertical yard lines, it just says the G, the H, the I.
Got it. And we had a question come up. How do you indicate where the yard markers and letters are on the actual physical floor? So how do you represent that on the chart?
This is one of my trade secrets, but if you're on a Pyware night school like this, then I suppose I can give it out. In the actual digitally printed floor, I have a Adobe Illustrator file that has every 6 inches, it has a tiny diamond, and inside that diamond is listed what the coordinate is. So like the front line, it would say the 34A, the 36A, the 38A, and it's printed upside down. Inside that, it's a 2-inch diamond, and inside it says what the actual coordinate is for all of the vertices of the boxes. So the student, because it's printed upside down, the student is out there learning the drill, and they look down and they see it says 38D or whatever it is. And so every 6 feet
on the floor.
It's literally printed, yeah. So whatever the image is that I go with, I then take that Illustrator file and put it on top of it because it's like a PNG. It's transparent except for those little dots. And then depending on the show, oftentimes I'll go back in if I'm if it's like Centerville or Rhythm X or somebody like that, I'll go back in and shade all of the dots so that they're a little bit closer to what the color is underneath. Because if you just make them all white or all black, then they'll show up differently on different parts of the floor.
Right. So basically you just overlay it, make it more transparent so it's barely a shadow when it's printed. So from
That's right.
afar, you cannot see that, but when you're right up on the floor, you can actually see it.
That's right. And I found over the years that I started doing this about 10 years ago. And about 5 years ago, I kind of decided that I didn't really need to hide them that much. When you watch the floor, when you watch the show from at least where the judges are, even if they're pretty bright, unless it's completely a different color than what the floor is, it's really hard to see them from that far away. And making them pretty visible for the kids just increases the amount of cleanliness.
Right. So that's on a digitally printed floor. Let's say I don't
Mm-hmm.
have access to one of those and we hand paint it. What would you suggest? Are there any suggestions that you would have?
Yeah, don't hand paint your floor.
Don't paint your floor.
No, that's if you did that, I would just do like you normally would if you're using measuring tape. Like what we do on our band room floor at Centerville, we very rarely use our tarp because the floor is 1 foot tiles.
Oh,
so
okay.
we take little diamonds of tape and put them every 6 feet and write down in a Sharpie what that is, which you could easily do on a painted floor as well.
Right.
Which that's another trade secret too. If you do have access to a band room or a cafeteria with 1 foot tiles, then using anything except for feet is really not as efficient as it could be. So when we don't have the tarp out there and we're just rehearsing on the band room floor and we have a dot every 6 feet, we also have every foot in between. So if a kid knows that they're two steps inside or 2 feet inside the 38, they can look down and see exactly what their dot is because it's a perfect grid.
Right, because you're dealing with 1 foot squares.
Yep.
Wonderful. I think that was our last question for that particular section. Were there any other questions in regards to digitally printed floors? I think we're ready to move on.
Okay, that sounds good. I can go to intervals now.
Perfect.
Let me pull that up. Oh, we just did intervals, right? We need to do step sizes.
Yeah, we just worked with the intervals diagram.
Great. And so I need to share the, can you share that file?
Yeah. The step size diagram?
Step size diagram, yeah.
It is on its way.
And I think that I've shared the screen correctly. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Sir.
So now the step sizes, instead of using 8 to 5, we came up with a new system. It's really the same system because 8 to 5 is just a fraction. And the numerator is how many steps it is. The denominator is how many yards it is. So what kids know is 8 to 5, 6 to 5, 5 to 5. Indoors, because I'm not using the big 15-foot yard lines, I'm using blocks of 6 feet. All I had to do was change that bottom denominator to 2, right? Which is 2 yards. So the first step size that we use is 4 to 2. And this takes a little bit of getting used to, but not much. Like if you just think, well, how many steps and how many yards? The 2 is always 1 block. So the block is 6 feet. 4 to 2 is going to be a step every 1.5 feet. So you're going to be a quarter of the yard line, splitting a quarter, back on, and you keep repeating that. So this is a pretty small step size. It's 18 inches. It's a little bit less than a normal 8 to 5 outdoors. But when you're marching fast, which indoor drum lines often do, and you're crab stepping, going at a 4 to 2 feels pretty good. And it also feels good that you're hitting the dot every 4 counts because that's what the music is usually in. So 4 to 2 is an easy one. It's 18 inches, it's 1.5 feet. The next one is 3 to 2. So 3 steps per 2 yards or block. And this one's easy, right? It's 2 feet, 24 inches. So already we've had 18 inches and 24 inches. Both of those are things that kids understand, right? 1.5 feet or 2 feet or 2 tiles if you have a tiled floor. This is a good step size. I like 3 to 2. It's a tiny bit bigger. You can see it's a 1.5 inches bigger than 8 to 5. And especially if your music's in 3/4 or 6/8 and you want to hit a block every 3 counts, this one feels pretty good. The next one is 2 to 2. This is every 3 feet. And this one, I often ask kids, what would be the translation outdoors? And it takes them a while to figure out that, like any fraction, if the numbers are the same, then it could be any number. So the translation outdoors is 5 to 5, which if you are familiar with 5 to 5, it's every yard, right? It's every tick mark on the field. This is a pretty big step size, and tenors probably, if they're crab stepping, won't want to do this step size very much. Snares can do it. Cymbals and bass drums can definitely do it because they're usually facing the direction and they're not crab stepping. But that's a pretty aggressive step size. And then the last one is one of my favorites. And this one we changed the denominator to 3 instead of 2, and it's called 4 to 3. So instead of dealing with a block, we're going a block and a half. And the first one is 2 1/4, right? Then the next one's going to be a quarter off. This one's 3/4 of a foot, right? Which is also an eighth. An eighth of a block is 3/4 of a foot. That's 9 inches. And then we get back to splitting here. So the easy thing about this one is if I'm going that direction, I move 3 blocks and 8 counts. So my first step, this is the one where math gets the kids a little confused, but the first step is 3/8 of a block, then splitting, then an 8, then on, and then it repeats itself. So on count 4, you're halfway, and on count 8, you've gone 3 blocks. This is my favorite step size because it's big, it's aggressive, but it's not as demanding as the 36-inch step, and it looks fast. So if you're ever, if the drum line's ever just head in one direction, I'm going to have them at that step size a lot. I like that one a lot. Okay, I'll stop sharing that.
With the changes in those stride sizes, do you end up teaching a lot of marching basics to get them used to it, or do you transition it, or is the transition easier?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do all of our marching basics at those step sizes. So like the first thing we would do is the plus sign. So we would go 16 counts forward at a 4 to 2, which is 4 blocks, right? We would learn what that step size feels going forward. And 18 inches going forward feels pretty small. So we would go 4 blocks forward, 4 blocks back, and then we would learn what it feels like to go to the right, to the left, back and forward, left and right. And then we would start doing boxes. And we do the boxes, we would do 16 steps or 4 blocks at a 4 to 2 all the way around the box. And then we would change it. We would go 3 blocks, 12 counts at a 3 to 2 all the way around. And then we would change it again and go to the 4 to 3. I usually skip past the 2 to 2 unless there's something specific in the show where they're all marching that. But that one's pretty brutal, especially at the beginning of the year, to have them march that big of a step size. But all of our asterisks, cross, plus, box, all the basics that we do indoors are all basically those 3 step sizes. So the goal there is that I'm training the kids to know exactly what the feel is. Like if I'm going to step this way and it's at a 3 to 2, I know exactly what 24 inches feels like. And they all know that, so that on step 1, they're clean. We talk a lot about not having set points that are 8 steps away, but that each one of those steps you take is a cleanable dot. And if you know exactly how many inches that step is, then you're a lot closer to being clean. Dustin, did I lose you?
When you're writing your shows, do you try to stick to a 4-step size, or?
Yeah, let me go back to the Pyware, and I'll show you. Okay, so can you see Pyware now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's skip ahead a little bit here. This is the base feature. They're held here. Okay, so like from 27 to 28, the snares are coming forward. So during that set, they move straight forward. And this is one where I kind of cheat a little bit. So the snares started here, and they just go straight forward. It's 8 counts, so that's 2 blocks. So they know I can say, okay, 4 to 2 forward, 8 counts, and then they know what their next dot is. When I go to the left here, let's see how far they went here. Okay, so this person started here and went 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks, right? And that's that step size I was talking about at the end, the 4 to 3, and that is 27-inch steps. That one, so they came forward and it's kind of smaller steps. Now when they push this way, it's much bigger. And the translation, so it's a 4 to 3. If you look up here on the right-hand side where Pyware tells us what our step sizes are, it shows 27 inches, which is what 4 to 3 is. It also shows what the translation is into 5. So as I'm writing, I've just gotten used to knowing that a 4 to 2 is a 10 to 5, a 3 to 2 is a 7.5 to 5, a 2 to 2 is a 5 to 5. We remember that one, and then the 4 to 3 is a 6.7 to 5. So that just keeps me, it reminds me, oh yeah, this is a 4 to 3 because that's a 6.7 to 5.
Right.
Okay, and then we'll go forward another little bit here. Okay, so now I think this whole block moves over. So we make a triangle here. And then when the whole thing moves over, let's see. Oh, it rotated. So anytime we go horizontally or vertically, I'm using almost always 4 to 2, 3 to 2, 4 to 3. Here's a good spot where you can look at some intervals though. So this is a triangle, right? A big wedge set. And side to side, this is at quarters. So my side to side interval is on, and then a quarter in or a foot and a half, then splitting, then a quarter out, and then on, a quarter in, and splitting again. So side to side, they're 4.5 feet wide. And then front to back, they're at 4s or 2/3, right? So this person's 4 feet, 4 feet, and these people are in the windows of that. So they're 2 feet and then on as we go. So in their dot books, they know they're writing down side to side interval because it's a diagonal, right? They need to know the pitch. Their side to side pitch is 4.5 and their front to back is 4s.
Awesome.
Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
We had a question if this show is available online.
This show?
Yes.
No, this was gonna be Centerville show, which we can watch a little bit if you want to. Would that be interesting or no?
So yeah, so this was going to be this year's show, correct?
That's right. So and it may be next year's show too, because we still had 5 weeks to go in our season and we hadn't even finished. Like we had just started our closer.
Right.
So I'll let this play a little bit.
If you don't mind playing a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah. And as you can see, like the functionality of what our props look like, and like the sides of these, they turn around at the end of the show and they were bright orange. The functionality that Pyware has to do all that is awesome.
We can only see the design view, so if you want to show the real view, we'll need to toggle that window over.
Yes. I'm figuring it out. The real view. I don't see it.
It might be, you may need to scroll down.
Yeah, still don't see it.
Maybe just show the whole screen.
I'll just, yep.
And you can pull it on the main window. We had another question. Do you find more and more drum lines are working with this grid and step sizes, or?
Yeah, I would say so. And some of that's going to be regional also, because like in this area, there's a lot of people that have gone through RhythmX and that are teaching all the schools around us. So they use the same system. Dustin, when I click on share my entire screen, it doesn't allow me to do that.
You'll need to share the entire screen and then click on it, and it's still not working for you?
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Perfect.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, so around here, a lot of the guys that have gone through Rhythm X that are younger teachers, they use it, and I've had some, the guys that I've taught to write that use it also. I guess that would be a question for the room also regionally, if this is something that a lot of people have caught on to, or if it's just more of a regional thing. So maybe post in the comments if groups in your area use the system or if this is all brand new information. So I'll let this play here. You can see a little bit of animation.
I'm posting a poll here. Let's see what we get. While we were watching this play, the font that you're using, is that one that you've designed, or is it one that you can share, or? Tim? Hello?
Okay, so, and this is a good example of some of the facings at the end there. With the group like Centerville, I stage most of it live, and then I notate it in Pyware so that they have coordinates. So things like facings or, mostly facings, but if this was a client that I didn't see every day, all that stuff would be really dialed in because you can change all that in the visual editor. But this I pulled up today and realized that it was just notated for them and not written and then sent to them. Did you ask a question about the font?
Yes, we had a question on what font you're using. Is that available?
Yeah, that's a great question. I got this font from a friend like 15 years ago, and I'm pretty sure that Jack Chambers made it, and it used to be able to be purchased. So it works nicely in bands too, because you can see the instrument. But I like it, like the dancers, you can tell that they're dancers, and at least the tenors, they take up a little bit more space visually.
Right.
So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. It's probably available online somewhere.
Well, we can do some research if you'll send me the name of that, and I'll see who I can find that might have that answer for us. That'd be great.
Yeah. Let me open up another file here real quick and show you what it looks like in marching band world. Because I wanted to show you something else with the 6-foot grid outdoors as well, if that's okay.
Perfect. Yes, sir. And Jeff, yes, he does put the music with it. It's just you're not able to hear the music through the sharing of the screen currently. I do have a question. Do you start writing first and then add the music, or do you write, or you put your music to it before you do anything?
I put the music to it before I do anything, 100%. I don't think there'd be any way to write without not already like having the music there. So the first thing I do is I put in my page tabs. So I'll listen to the music, I'll go through the score, and I'll write where I think my page tabs are going to be. And then I'll go through and sync the music, which is everybody's favorite thing to do in the world, and then start writing. So yes, definitely music first. I know that there's some guys that just write from the score. I don't know how you could possibly do that though. That's hard for me. Okay, so this is what the font looks like in a marching band. My computer's being a little bit slow, I'm sorry.
One more question about syncing. Do you put a click track with the music before syncing, or do you just use a straight audio file?
I prefer to. That's usually what the music arranger provides me. So like in my writer, I always ask like I'd like an MP3 with the click track. I actually what I prefer is an MP3 with the click track and then also an MP3 without it, so that I can animate it correctly, but then not have to hear the click track
Right. Then you
incessantly
swap
while
it
I'm
out for
writing.
the click track free version.
That's right. So this is a cheat that I use. So the 6-foot grid, about, let's see, in 2012, I did this with the Bluecoats, and I did it with Centerville for a couple of years, where I took the 6-foot grid from indoors and I put it outdoors. And it was a pretty bold experiment. Side to side, it worked really well. My goal was to get kids to use the tick marks instead of using 8 to 5 steps. So everything was based on separating the field into 6 feet blocks, just like indoors. Mathematically, it works really nicely because you know how front to back we have that back hash issue. When you're just dealing with feet, the football field's made of feet anyway instead of steps. And the thing that I found was that the kids really liked it, but the staff, the old staff especially, they didn't like learning a new system. So what I've done is gone back to the 8 to 5 grid, but I cheat sometimes and I use a 3.2 step. So you can see here, if you look down, this person here is on the 45, and then 5 people later, this person's on the 35, and in between we've got 4 people, right? So this interval is a 3.2. So I'm sure many of you in your marching bands have done a 3-step interval, and you know it's on, 3, 2, 1, splitting. And like 3 steps is just off the tick, right? In my opinion, if it's going to be just off the tick, why not put it on the tick? So sometimes this is a little tedious because it's not super easy to get 3.2 all the time. So like in this situation, this is 3 steps front to back and 3.2 side to side. And if you look at the real view, hopefully we can here. If you look at the real view, you can see that the ticks, right? See how they're all just on these ticks. And so especially if you're teaching a high school, I mean, to teach a kid, hey, look forward and be on that tick, as opposed to go to the yard line, mark off 3 steps that are probably inaccurate anyway. This system works really nicely. And it worked really nicely at the Bluecoats too. I remember there was a spot in the show where the tubas were across the back and their intervals were always just perfect, but it was because I just put them on the ticks and let them stand there. So I'll play this little clip here at the end and you'll see where we ended up on the ticks at the end. I think when I'm sharing my screen, I'm a little bit slower. Like when I share the whole screen.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a lag.
Okay, I'll play this here. So right now they're at 2 steps, and then they're gonna move out to the 3.2. And now as each one of these rotates, they keep going back to the 3.2 side to side. So the kid is aiming for that dot to just land and look straight forward at the ticks. That's it. So I'm going to go back to, do you need to see anything else on here, or should I go back?
I think we can go back. Is there any other questions about that we need to look at? Any other questions for Tim? Are we have a new next section to go over? Let's see here.
So it looks like from the polling answers, most people, the majority of people that have not used this.
Right. Here's a question. So let's say we're teaching this for the first time. How long does it take for incoming new members to learn against existing members that might have maybe transferred in from a 8 to 5 style marching?
I've found that if your floor is gridded correctly, if you've got the dots out there, teaching the step sizes is really easy. And most of the time when I have new kids, I'll sit everybody down, and basically the speech that I gave at the beginning that talked about 4 to 2, 3 to 2, 4 to 3, 2 to 2, I'll have a kid stand up, a vet, and actually get on the dot, and you can see them take, okay, 1.5 feet, splitting, 1.5 feet on, and I'll have them do like 4 blocks to show what that 18-inch step is. I'm also at that time having them write everything into their dot book. So there are only 4 choices of the step size, and then the 4 choices of the intervals, the ons, on and splitting, thirds, and quarters. They have that in their dot book, and they know that's going to be most of the time the default of what they're doing. And so then when I'm teaching, oftentimes I will say, okay, everybody, how big is our first step? And their job is to know it's 24 inches, right? Everybody's taking a 3 to 2 step, because if that first step's not the right step size, then we're dirty instantly. But yeah, I think the kids learn it pretty fast.
Wonderful. You're talking dot books. What do you primarily print out of Pyware, and then what do you have the kids do on the fly to make it where that drives their memory?
Well, we'll do, especially indoors, we do a lot of just random, hey, Katie, what's your dot? And they need to know what their dot is at any time. I also will do, like, if they're in a diagonal, I'll ask them, what's your pitch, to know what your side to side is. Their responsibility in the wintertime, we really like to use Ultimate Drill Book for both fall and winter. I think that it's just a huge resource. In the fall this year, what we found worked best was that the kids learned their drill with their phones, with the Ultimate Drill Book, so they could see what their dot is, they could see where it was going, they could hear it with the music, all that. We loved that. And then we made them write from the drill book into an actual dot book that they then carried with them all the time, so that we didn't have kids with phones on the field like the entire season. Indoors, it's just way more about them writing down their dots. Because like I said, a remote client is going to get the either Ultimate Drill Book file, like I'll upload it to their server, or they're going to get charts and coordinates. Then it's on them to pass those out to their kids. A group that I stage live, though, it's a lot more of me telling you, okay, snares, you guys are all going to be on the E. I want you at a 3-foot interval. The end snare is going to be here. The other end snare is going to be here. And then it's their job to figure out what's in between. And then they write that into their dot book. That's kind of the ultimate goal for me, especially live staging, is to get the amount of words to be the smallest amount possible. So I should be able to say to the bass drums, okay, you're on the 48I, you're on the 36J, and you're on side to side, and you're on and splitting front to back. And then they have to figure out what that means for the people in between. And then I've only said one very small sentence instead of every single person telling them what their dot is. Just a time saver.
Right. One other question. If, let's say you've got a new client coming in, and you're sending they wanted to try to implement the 6-foot grid on a football field. What you said you had some pushback from older staff members. What if they wanted to try to embark on that? What would be your suggestions on trying to get that change? If they wanted to try to implement that this year,
I would say don't do it.
Don't do it.
Yeah, like I spent 3 years really, really trying to dial that system in because I thought it empirically made more sense, and I still do think that. But changing the paradigm of what everybody's learned in the past, I had a hard time with it, and I was at the places that were actually implementing it. To try and do it remotely like that, I would say just stick with the 8-foot or the 8-step system, but use some of those cheats, like use a 1.6 interval, which is on every tick, or the 3.2 interval, which is every 2 ticks. I tend to use front to back. I stick on the 8-step grid, But side to side, I call it cheating. It's not cheating, but instead of using a 3-step grid, just use 3.2, and then the kids can be on the ticks. It's just way, way easier.
And that's where you would implement the use for coordinates printout and the to a tenth of a step, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, oftentimes I'll just leave it because I want the quarter steps or the half steps front to back. And if I don't use the tenth of a step, I'll use the quarter step, and the kids know that, like, if it says 3.275, that's 3.2. Or oftentimes we'll just say, hey, everybody, this was on the ticks. And then they, in their dot book, write 47. That's all they have to write, because they don't have to be 3 steps in or 3 steps out. They just know that they're on the 47-yard line.
Got it. We have a question from Elena. In what situations do you use the side-to-side on tick marks on the football field for the entire show, or just certain sections? She's never heard of that being used before, so she wanted to see how you use it.
Yeah, I would say I probably use it for 25% of the show. Basically, it's anytime, like anything that's curvilinear, I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to use the normal steps that they're used to. It's almost always, if it's a squared off form, if it's flat to the front, and I want clean intervals side to side, then I will use it. So any type of company front, like old school company fronts used to all be like at a 1.5, which if you make it a 1.6, it's just on the ticks. It's on every yard line. And that's just so much easier for the kids to clean and to understand. So I try to use the 4-step grid, like if I'm going to be at on and splitting or at 2s for most of the time. And then anytime I have something side to side that I really want to be clean interval wise, then I'll go to the 3.2s and 1.6s.
Great.
I tend to use it a lot for the drum line, actually. So like the spacing that I use for the indoor, usually it's 3 foot for the snares, which is on ticks, or 1.6. And usually it's ons for the bass drums, which is every 2 yards, the 3.2. So outdoors, the drum line especially, they get like, you kind of, a lot of times the drum line gets put in an interval and then they stay there, right? I'll use that for a lot of my drum lines, especially if I write their winter shows, because they're used to all those spacings anyway.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Elena, does that answer your question? Wonderful. So here's a question for you: is if we have a group that would be interested in learning the 6-foot grid, is that something that you would be able to travel out to them and do a clinic on, or is that something that you would be interested in?
Yeah, a lot of times when I get new, especially indoors, when I get new clients, I will almost insist on it. It's not confusing and it makes a ton of sense, but if you've not used it before, it helps to have the person that designed it be the one that explains it. So those 4-step sizes and the 4 intervals and how to read the floor. So if I tell you you're 2 behind the 38, you know, or 2 outside the 38, you know, that's 2 feet. Or I could say you're a 3rd outside the 38, that's also 2 feet. So that I can sit down before they even learn the show. I like to do that like a month before the season and include basics. So I teach them the system and I teach them 5 or 6 basics exercises that use these step sizes, so that then they can be working on those and they can be learning how to read the floor before they get 50 charts for an opener and have to, you know, learn it that way.
Right. Get them a nice basics thing that they can repeat. We have a question from Jason. He says he's stuck in the mindset of keeping the drum line in the back during marching band shows. What advice do you have to get the drum line broken out to give them a bit more to do?
That's a good question. A lot of that is up to your arranger. So your music arranger, if the drum line's just playing the whole time, they end up being the time source for the band, basically. That show that I was just showing you on the screen, we put the pit in the back and they were the time source. and that let me get the drum line in front a lot more. That was its own whole can of worms. But if the arranger allows for some windows where the drum line maybe doesn't play for a little bit and can relocate geographically to get to a spot, one thing that I've found lately is that side to side, that if you'll see this especially in drum corps right now, because with amplification, the horn lines are so loud now that with the drum line in the back, you can't hear the drum line, you can't hear any of the stuff coming through the horn line. So if you look at like the top 6 drum corps now, they're doing a lot more side to side or with the drum line even in the front, which is really unusual. So, and that depends on your circumstance, obviously. If you've got a small horn line and a big drum line, it's going to be hard to break out of that. One thing to do is to ask your arranger for like, hey, can I have the tenors play with the trumpets and make it like a 2-letter thing? So it's part of the show, and program that in. So then you can break them apart. You've got time for your drill writer to get them back in with the drum line, but ask for some of those windows ahead of time, and that will allow for a little bit more flexibility for that.
Great. Do you have any suggestions or advice on guard integration? He says he's not the best at color guard integration.
Yes, I do. This is another hour, but I'll try and give a couple little hints. One thing that I like to do in, especially for marching bands, is take my guard, and oftentimes I will do the guard first in broad strokes. Like, I know I'm gonna want a rifle feature here, and I want it on this side of the field. So I'll go to that page tab where it is musically, and I'll put the rifles where I think that they're probably gonna end up. Or I know that I want full field coverage for the flags. That's one that I'll often do, make a perfect grid and spread the flags way out, and then I can kind of draw in the horns where they fit, instead of drawing in the horns first and then hoping to dot in the color guard and have it look good. So I definitely like to orchestrate the color guard, and I'm a drummer. I was a snare drummer, and that's my real passion, but I write a lot of marching band and drum corps drill. So learning how to do those things is definitely possible. I would say watch some videos. The thing right now in high school bands is that their guards are so big at the top that that's probably not everybody's circumstance. But any of the top drum corps, watching what they do with their color guards, just for not for stealing ideas, but for inspiration, I think is good. And like I said, I like to plot my guard moments out with broad strokes first before I even start moving everybody around.
Wonderful. We have a question from Joseph. Did you use the 6-foot grid in Rhythm X in 2015 and 2016?
2015. Yeah, I've used it there since 08, 07. Yeah, 08 or 07 was the first year we started using it there. And yeah, we used it in Wired in 2016, or what was 2015? Razor's Edge. And we actually used the 6-foot grid during All the World the Stage, which was 2018, and we didn't have a floor at all. That was a challenge. But we rehearsed on a tarp, and we rehearsed on a floor with tiles, so they knew the show. And then we just stretched a long rope across the front, and we used the pit. Like the pit always went in the same spots. So like instead of knowing where the 48 is, they knew that the end of this marimba was the 48 because they didn't have a tarp to clean to. That was a real challenge, but it was fun.
So you used your front ensemble as your grid, essentially.
Yep. Yeah, and front to back, we stretched a rope that had the 6-foot markings on it, and like our props that we put out there, like there was a chair that we knew that was on the C, and they could use that for the first 2 minutes of the show before the chair left and went somewhere else, or the box that was in the back. We knew that started on the G, and we knew what that corner was. So the kids had some reference points that were out there, but there wasn't that whole sea of dots of 6-foot grid to clean to.
Right.
Which I wouldn't recommend for really anybody. I mean, it was difficult with them, and they're some of the best kids in the world. So.
Right.
Use a tarp.
Use a tarp when you can.
Yeah.
We have a question from Jason. How do you see indoor percussion designs developing in the future? What new innovations, trends, or anything like that?
Good question. We would have found out in a couple weeks. I'm not sure. Rhythm X was using the color guard this year. We had 5 color guard members, and that was a new experiment for us. Not sure if we'll do that next year or not. We're definitely seeing more props and more visual ensemble people. I think that where it's going right now, we're starting to see more sensitivity and less rim shots and less loud, which I think is good for everybody, good for the sanity of the judges that have to sit through 28 independent world groups. I hope it doesn't skew too far in that direction and that everybody's just emo and sad all the time, but I think it's skewing that way, at least right now. And hopefully, I think that as the groups get better, because right now it's really deep, like there's a lot of really, really good groups, and that entertainment is becoming a priority. Like you really have to entertain on a high level across the board, not just with what your hands are doing.
Right. Well, another question from Jason. He said it's a random fanboy question. One of his favorite shows when he first started studying and getting into this was the 2009 show Touch. He'd like to know how the idea of tossing a stick from member to member and in the back come about, and how did you feel every time you saw the stick go up?
Good question. Let me just sidebar. The Touch show was an interesting one with the 6-foot grid because that floor was curved. And so all of the grid lines were also curved. And so I used the side to sides, the 50 to 48, 46. But the front to backs were that whole line across the front, that was the A. So like the Pyware file for that show is flat, it's square, but the actual tarp itself was curved. So when I told the kids, you get used to it when you're watching it, but if you actually look, there's no straight lines in that show anywhere because everything's always based on that curved grid. That's just a little sidebar. I like that. So the stick toss happened on accident during a rehearsal, where the person who dropped it, he saw that, like the tenor player saw that the snare dropped it, and he was on the end of that form, and it was just during a rehearsal. He didn't think anything of it, and he tossed the stick to him, and we saw it and we're like, whoa, that was crazy. So yeah, it was started out as an accident, but when we saw it, we thought it was cool. We've obviously done plenty of stick tosses over the years. You said, what did I think when it was in the air? I mean, I always just kind of roll my eyes at it because it gets some of the biggest applause of a show that we've spent months designing, at what we think is a really high level. And then you just toss a stick and everybody loses their mind. But people like to be entertained with that. So yeah, it was an accident. The finals night one was crazy because Justin had to like reach back to get it and come back in and then attack that triplet roll right then. So yeah, I was a little nervous that night for sure.
Great. Were there any other questions that you'd like to ask Tim? Is there anything else that you'd like to cover, Tim?
I think that's good. My email is timfairbanks@me.com. If anybody, if anybody has follow-up questions, I'm always happy to share. I love the activity, and anything I can do to help people is definitely something I want to do.
Awesome. Well, maybe let's schedule another one where we can talk more about guard integration. You said that's an hour-long thing, so let's come back and circle around for that sometime.
Okay, that sounds great. Justin, I appreciate you having me on, and thanks to everybody who listened.
All right. Well, everyone have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.